I walked in on my husband's funeral rehearsal, but he was standing right behind me. You know that feeling when your whole world just stops? When reality literally breaks in front of your eyes and you question if you're losing your mind? Yeah, that happened to me 3 weeks ago, and I'm still trying to process what I saw. My husband Thomas was supposed to be at work that Thursday afternoon, but I found him at a funeral home, at his own funeral rehearsal, while he was very much alive and standing right next to me. This is the most insane thing that's ever happened to me, and I need to tell someone about it before I completely lose it. So, let me back up a little bit. My name is Rebecca, and I've been married to Thomas for 7 years. We met in college, dated for 3 years, got married right after graduation. Pretty standard love story, right? He's an accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown. I work from home as a freelance graphic designer. We have a nice little house in the suburbs, no kids yet, but we've been talking about it. Everything was normal, or at least I thought it was normal. Looking back now, there were signs. Tiny, weird things that didn't make sense at the time, but now they're screaming at me. About 6 months ago, Thomas started acting different. Nothing major, just small changes. He'd come home from work and immediately go take a shower, every single day. Before, he'd usually change into sweats and relax for a bit, maybe watch TV with me, but suddenly it was straight to the bathroom the second he walked through the door. I asked him about it once, and he said he just felt gross after being in the office all day. The air conditioning was broken, and everyone was sweating. Made sense, I guess. But the air conditioning was supposedly broken for 6 months? That should have been my first clue. Then there were the phone calls. Thomas would get these calls at odd hours, like 9 at night or early Saturday morning. He'd look at his phone, his face would go all serious, and he'd step outside to take it. Every time I asked who it was, he'd say it was work stuff, boring client issues or his boss being annoying. And I believed him because why wouldn't I? Thomas had never given me a reason not to trust him. We had a good marriage. We talked about everything. We never went to bed angry. We were that couple that other people found annoying because we were so happy together. But the phone calls kept happening, more and more often, and Thomas started spending more time on his laptop at night. He'd sit at the kitchen table for hours, typing away, and when I'd come up behind him, he'd quickly minimize whatever he was working on. When I asked about it, he'd say he was working on a surprise project for me. A gift or something. I thought maybe he was planning a vacation or looking at houses in a nicer neighborhood. Something sweet and thoughtful like Thomas always was. The Thursday everything fell apart started out completely normal. I woke up around 8, made coffee, started working on a logo design for a client. Thomas left for work at his usual time, gave me a kiss goodbye, told me he loved me. Standard Thursday morning. I was deep into my work when I realized I needed to run some errands. We were out of groceries. I had to pick up my prescription from the pharmacy, just regular life stuff. I finished up what I was working on around 2 in the afternoon and headed out. The pharmacy was close to Thomas's office, and I thought maybe I'd surprise him. Bring him coffee or something, say hi. Maybe we could grab an early dinner together. So after I picked up my prescription, I stopped at his favorite coffee shop and got him his usual order. Medium dark roast, 2 sugars, a little bit of cream. I was feeling good, you know? Like I was being a thoughtful wife. Maybe we'd been in a bit of a rut lately, and this would be a nice little gesture to break out of it. I pulled into the parking lot of his office building and texted him that I was downstairs with coffee. I waited for a response. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. Nothing. That was weird because Thomas always has his phone on him during work hours. Clients need to reach him. His boss messages him constantly. He usually responds within a minute or two. I tried calling. Straight to voicemail. Now I was getting worried. What if something happened? What if he was sick and passed out in the bathroom or something? I decided to go up to his office. I'd been there a few times before, knew which floor, knew roughly where his desk was. The receptionist recognized me and waved me through. I walked down the hallway to the accounting department. Thomas's desk was in the back corner by the window, but when I got there, his chair was empty. His computer was off. There was no coffee mug, no jacket on the back of his chair, none of his stuff. Like he hadn't been there at all that day. I stood there, confused for a second, then one of his coworkers walked by. Linda, I think her name was. I'd met her at the company holiday party. I asked her if she'd seen Thomas, and she gave me this puzzled look. She said Thomas had called in sick that morning. Wasn't feeling well, probably wouldn't be in the rest of the week. She hoped he felt better soon. My stomach dropped. Thomas had left the house that morning in his work clothes, kissed me goodbye, told me he was going to work. He wasn't sick. He seemed perfectly fine. So where did he go? I thanked Linda and walked back to my car in a daze. My hands were shaking as I got behind the wheel. The coffee I'd bought for Thomas sat in the cup holder, getting cold. My mind was racing through possibilities. Was he having an affair? Was he meeting someone? But Thomas wasn't like that. He wasn't a cheater. We had a good relationship. We trusted each other. I sat in that parking lot for probably 20 minutes, just staring at my phone. Should I call him again? Should I drive around looking for his car? Should I go home and wait for him? Part of me wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe he had a doctor's appointment he forgot to mention. Maybe he was planning a surprise and had to take the day off. But the lying part bothered me. Why lie about going to work? Why not just tell me he needed the day off? I decided to try to find him. I know that sounds crazy, but I couldn't just sit there. I needed answers. I pulled up the Find My iPhone app on my phone. We'd set it up years ago, mostly so we could find each other if we got separated at a crowded event or something. I'd honestly forgotten it existed until that moment. I opened the app and looked for Thomas's location. And there it was, a little dot on the map showing exactly where his phone was. He was across town, in a neighborhood I didn't recognize, near some kind of business district. I put the address into my GPS and started driving. My heart was pounding the entire time. I didn't know what I was going to find. Another woman's apartment? Some secret second office? I genuinely had no idea. The drive took about 15 minutes. I kept checking the app to make sure he was still there. The dot didn't move. Whatever he was doing, he was staying put. I pulled onto the street where his location showed. It was a quiet area, mostly small businesses. A dry cleaner, a tax office, a flower shop. And then I saw it. A funeral home. Peaceful Rest Funeral Services. The name was right there on a tasteful sign out front. And according to my phone, Thomas's phone was inside that building, a funeral home. My husband, who was supposed to be at work, who had lied about being sick, was at a funeral home. My first thought was that maybe someone died. Maybe a relative I didn't know about, or a friend from his past. Maybe he didn't want to upset me, so he didn't mention it. I parked across the street and just stared at the building for a minute. It looked nice, professional. Lots of flowers in the windows. Very serene and calm. Not threatening at all. But I felt this sense of dread in my chest. Something was wrong. I could feel it. I got out of my car and walked across the street. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The place was quiet, soft music playing from somewhere. It smelled like flowers and that weird air freshener scent that's supposed to be calming. There was a reception desk, but nobody was sitting there. I stood in the entrance area, not sure what to do. Should I call out? Should I just start looking around? Then I heard voices coming from down a hallway to my left. I recognized one of them immediately. Thomas. He was here. I walked toward the sound, my footsteps silent on the plush carpet. The voices got louder as I approached. There was a door slightly open at the end of the hallway. Light spilled out into the corridor. I could hear Thomas talking to someone. His voice sounded normal, casual even, like he was having a regular conversation. I reached the door and pushed it open a little more, and what I saw made my brain completely short-circuit. It was a viewing room. You know, one of those rooms where they have the casket during a funeral. There was a casket at the front of the room, a nice wooden one, closed. Rows of chairs set up facing it, flowers everywhere. And standing in the middle of all of it was Thomas, my husband, wearing the same clothes he'd left the house in that morning, talking to a man in a dark suit who was clearly the funeral director. But that wasn't the crazy part. The crazy part was what they were talking about. I stood there, frozen in the doorway, listening. The funeral director was going over details. What time the service would start, how many people were expected, the order of events, who would speak, what music would play, and Thomas was nodding along, asking questions, making suggestions. Like he was planning a normal funeral for a normal dead person, except the funeral was for him. Thomas, my very alive husband, standing right there in front of me. The funeral director kept saying things like, "And then we'll have the eulogy for Mr. Thomas Richardson, and your wife will be seated in the front row here, and we'll have the photo collage of your life displayed on this easel." I thought I was losing my mind. I genuinely thought I was having some kind of psychotic break and hallucinating the whole thing. I must have made a sound because suddenly both men turned to look at me. The funeral director looked confused. But Thomas? The look on Thomas's face was pure terror. His eyes went wide, his mouth fell open. All the color drained from his face. We just stared at each other for what felt like an hour, but was probably only a few seconds. Neither of us said anything. The funeral director looked between us, clearly picking up on the tension, but not understanding what was happening. Finally, Thomas spoke. His voice came out all shaky and weird. He said my name. Rebecca. Just that. Nothing else. Like he couldn't think of what to say next. I still couldn't move. My brain was trying to process what I was seeing, but it didn't make any sense. None of it made sense. Why was my husband planning his own funeral? Was this some kind of joke? Some weird surprise party gone wrong? But the funeral director seemed very serious and professional. This wasn't a prank. I managed to get some words out. I asked Thomas what was going on. What was this? Why was he here? The funeral director must have realized this was a private situation because he quietly excused himself and left the room. Then it was just me and Thomas, standing in this funeral home viewing room, with a casket that was apparently supposed to be for him sitting there between us. Thomas opened his mouth to say something, then closed it, then opened it again. He looked like he was trying to figure out where to even start. He ran his hand through his hair, which is what he always does when he's stressed. I could see his hand shaking. Finally, he told me to sit down. He said this was going to sound insane, but he needed me to let him explain. I didn't sit down. I was too wired, too confused. I told him to just tell me what the hell was happening right now. And then he told me. The whole thing. And somehow the truth was even crazier than anything I could have imagined. Thomas said he was in trouble. Big trouble. Financial trouble that had spiraled completely out of control. He said it started about a year ago. There was an investment opportunity at work. One of his clients was putting together this deal, something about cryptocurrency and offshore accounts. It was supposed to be a sure thing. Easy money. Double your investment in 6 months, guaranteed. Thomas had always been cautious with money. That's literally his job, being careful with finances. But he said he got greedy. We'd been talking about buying a bigger house, maybe starting a family. He wanted to give me everything I deserved. So he took some of our savings and invested it. $20,000. Without telling me. And at first, it worked. The investment grew. He was getting statements showing the money increasing. After 3 months, his 20,000 had turned into 35,000. He was thrilled. He thought he'd hit the jackpot. Then the client asked if he wanted to invest more, said there was an even bigger opportunity coming up. Really exclusive, only for special investors. The potential returns were massive. Thomas could turn 35,000 into 100,000 in just a few months. He'd be able to put a down payment on a huge house. We could have the life we always dreamed about. So he did it. He invested everything. He even took out a personal loan for another 15,000 and put that in too. $50,000 total. I was still standing there in shock, listening to him talk. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Thomas had hidden all of this from me, made these huge financial decisions without saying a word. But it got worse. So much worse. The investment was a scam. Of course it was a scam. The client disappeared. The company wasn't real. The offshore accounts didn't exist. It was all fake. A Ponzi scheme that collapsed almost overnight. Thomas lost everything. All $50,000 gone. But the personal loan was still very real. Thomas owed $15,000 plus interest to the bank, and he had no way to pay it back. He'd emptied our savings account. He couldn't tell me because then I'd know what he did. So he started trying to fix it himself. He took out another loan from a different bank. Used that to make payments on the first loan, thinking he'd figure out a way to pay everything back later. Then he needed another loan to pay that one. And another, and another. He was drowning in debt, each loan bigger than the last, the interest piling up faster than he could handle. Thomas said he felt like he was trapped in this nightmare. Every day he woke up and the problem had gotten bigger. He was working extra hours, taking on side projects, anything to try to make money. That's what all those late-night laptop sessions were. He was doing freelance accounting work for anyone who would pay him. But it wasn't enough, not even close. The debt kept growing. He was up to almost $80,000 owed to various banks and lenders. Some of them were starting to call the house, send threatening letters. He'd been intercepting them before I could see them. Then, about 3 months ago, he borrowed money from the wrong person. One of the lenders he'd found online turned out to be connected to some seriously bad people. Not a bank. Not a legitimate lending company. Actual criminals. Loan sharks. The kind of people who break your legs if you don't pay up. Thomas said he didn't realize what he was getting into until it was too late. He borrowed $20,000 from them at an insane interest rate. He thought he could pay it back quickly and be done with it, but he couldn't pay it back. Not even close. The loan sharks started making threats. They showed up at his office, cornered him in the parking lot, told him if he didn't pay what he owed, they were going to hurt him. Hurt me. Hurt anyone he cared about. They didn't care about excuses. They wanted their money, plus interest, which by now had grown to almost $40,000. Thomas said he was terrified. He couldn't go to the police because he'd gotten the money illegally. He couldn't tell me because he'd already lied for so long. He felt completely trapped. So he came up with a plan. A completely insane plan. He decided to fake his own death. If he was dead, the debt would disappear. The loan sharks couldn't collect from a dead person. The banks would have to write off the loans. Insurance money would take care of me. I'd be okay financially. He could start over somewhere with a new identity. He'd been researching it for weeks. How to get fake documents, how to make it look real, how to actually pull off faking your own death. The funeral rehearsal was part of that plan. He'd been setting everything up. He had a death certificate ready to file. He'd found someone who would sell him a fake body. I know that sounds completely crazy, but apparently there's a black market for that kind of thing. He was going to stage a car accident. Make it look like he died on impact. The body would be too damaged to identify clearly. They'd use dental records, which he'd also faked. The funeral would happen. Everyone would think he was dead, and then he'd disappear. He was planning to do it next week. That's why he was at the funeral home, making sure everything was set up correctly, rehearsing how it would all go down. He wanted it to be perfect, so nobody would suspect anything, and he never expected me to find out. Never thought I'd track his phone and show up at the funeral home. The whole plan was falling apart right in front of him, and he looked absolutely devastated. I finally sat down in one of the chairs. My legs couldn't hold me up anymore. This was too much. Way too much information to process. My husband had lost $50,000 of our money in a scam, then gotten us $80,000 in debt trying to fix it, then borrowed money from literal criminals. And now he was planning to fake his own death and abandon me, leave me thinking he was dead while he started a new life somewhere else. Every single thing he'd told me felt like a punch to the stomach. I asked him how he could do this, how he could lie to me for an entire year, how he could make these decisions without me, how he could plan to let me think he was dead. Did he have any idea how destroyed I would have been? I would have grieved for him, mourned him. My whole life would have been shattered, and he was just going to let that happen so he could run away from his problems. Thomas was crying now, full on sobbing. He kept saying he was sorry. He knew it was wrong. He knew it was insane. But he didn't know what else to do. He felt like he was protecting me by keeping it secret. He thought if he could just fix it all himself, I'd never have to know how badly he'd messed up. And when that didn't work, when things got too dangerous, he thought the best thing he could do was disappear. Let me move on with my life, get the insurance money, be free of him and his mistakes. I told him that was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. We were married. We were supposed to be a team. We were supposed to handle things together. Instead, he'd lied to me for a year and then planned to traumatize me for the rest of my life by faking his death. How was that protecting me? How was that love? He'd made everything so much worse by trying to hide it. If he'd just told me from the beginning, we could have dealt with it together. We could have made a plan, gone to the police about the loan sharks, filed for bankruptcy if we had to. There were options, legal options. But instead, he'd chosen the most extreme, most hurtful, most insane path possible. Thomas said he knew that now. He said he'd been so deep in the mess that he couldn't think straight anymore. Every decision he made was just him panicking and making things worse. He'd completely lost perspective. He asked me what we were going to do now, and honestly, I had no idea. I was angry. I was hurt. I was confused. But underneath all of that, I was also scared, because those loan sharks were still out there. The debt was still real. The danger hadn't gone away just because I found out about it. I told Thomas we needed to go home. We needed to figure this out together, like we should have done from the start. He agreed. We left the funeral home. I'm sure the funeral director was very confused about the whole situation, but honestly, I didn't care. We got in our separate cars and drove home. The whole drive, I kept thinking about how my entire life had just been flipped upside down. This morning I woke up thinking I had a normal marriage to a normal guy. Now I was dealing with massive debt, criminal loan sharks, and a husband who'd planned to fake his own death. When we got home, we sat at the kitchen table and Thomas showed me everything. Bank statements, loan documents, text messages from the loan sharks. It was worse than I'd even realized. The threats were graphic. These people were serious. They wanted their money, and they didn't care how they got it. Thomas said they'd given him until the end of the month, 2 weeks away. If he didn't pay them back by then, they were going to take payment another way. He was pretty sure that meant they were going to kill him, or hurt me to get to him, or both. I felt sick. This was real danger. These weren't just scary emails or vague threats. These were actual criminals who hurt people for a living. And my husband had gotten us tangled up with them. I asked Thomas why he didn't go to the police. He said he was afraid they'd arrest him for the fake death certificate he'd already filed. Afraid the loan sharks would find out and retaliate before the police could do anything. Afraid that even if the police helped, we'd still be buried in legal debt and have no way to pay it off. We stayed up all night talking, going through options. Most of them were bad. We could try to run, but they'd probably find us. We could go to the police, but that came with its own risks. We could try to negotiate with the loan sharks, but we had no money to negotiate with. We could file for bankruptcy, but that wouldn't make the loan sharks go away. Every path forward seemed impossible. I was exhausted and scared and angry, and I didn't know what to do. Around 3 a.m, I had an idea. It was crazy. Maybe as crazy as Thomas's fake death plan, but it might actually work. I told Thomas about it, and at first he thought I was joking. But the more we talked about it, the more it made sense. We could use his fake death plan, but instead of him actually disappearing, we'd use it to get the loan sharks off our back. We'd fake his death publicly, get the funeral done, make it look completely real. But Thomas wouldn't actually leave. He'd go into hiding for a little while, just until things cooled down. Once the loan sharks thought he was dead, they'd stop looking for the money. They'd write off the debt. And then Thomas could slowly resurface with a new identity for a while, and we'd figure out the rest later. Thomas wasn't sure it would work, but honestly, we were out of options. This was our Hail Mary. So, we spent the next few days setting everything up. Thomas went back to the funeral home and finished the arrangements. I played the part of the grieving widow who was too distraught to be involved in the planning. The funeral director was very understanding. He had no idea it was all fake. We staged the car, accident. Thomas crashed his car into a tree on a back road, with the fake body inside. He called it in anonymously. The police showed up, pulled the body out, and identified it as Thomas based on the dental records he'd faked. The next week was the hardest week of my life. I had to pretend my husband was dead. I had to accept condolences from friends and family. I had to cry at his funeral, which wasn't hard because I was actually crying. Not because he was dead, but because of everything that had happened. The lies, the debt, the danger, our whole life falling apart. His parents were devastated. His coworkers were shocked. Everyone bought it completely. Nobody suspected anything. The loan sharks sent flowers to the funeral. Can you believe that? They sent a huge arrangement with a card that said, "Sorry for your loss." I guess that was their way of confirming he was really dead. After the funeral, they never contacted us again. The debt disappeared. They wrote it off. Thomas was dead, so there was no one to collect from. It actually worked. Thomas stayed hidden for 3 months. He was living in a rental property 2 towns over, using a fake name. We couldn't see each other much because we had to be careful, but we'd meet up every couple of weeks in secret. It was weird and stressful, and not the life either of us wanted, but we were safe. The immediate danger was gone. We could finally breathe for a second and figure out the next steps. During those 3 months, I worked with a lawyer to deal with the legitimate debt. The bank loans, the maxed-out credit cards, all the legal stuff Thomas had hidden from me. It was bad, really bad. We ended up having to file for bankruptcy, lost pretty much everything, had to sell the house. It was crushing, but at least it was legal and above board. No more criminals, no more death threats, just regular financial disaster that we could actually recover from eventually. After 3 months, we decided it was safe enough for Thomas to come back. Not as himself, obviously. He was legally dead, but he got new identity documents. Not fake ones this time. Actual legal documents through a program for people in witness protection type situations. It's complicated and I don't fully understand how it works. But basically, Thomas Richardson is dead. The man I'm married to now is Daniel Thompson. Same person, different name. We moved to a different state, started completely over. It's been 6 months since the funeral. 6 months since I walked into that funeral home and found my husband planning his own death. Life is weird now. We're still married, but to everyone here, we're a new couple. Nobody knows our history. We're just Daniel and Rebecca Thompson, regular people who moved here for work. We're renting a tiny apartment, both working new jobs, starting from scratch financially. It's hard, really hard. But at least we're safe. At least we're together. I still think about what happened all the time. How close we came to losing everything. How Thomas's lies almost destroyed both of our lives. We're in counseling now, trying to rebuild the trust that got shattered, trying to figure out how to move forward. Some days are better than others. Some days I'm so angry at him I can barely look at him. Other days I'm just grateful we both survived this nightmare. The thing that haunts me most is thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't tracked his phone that day. If I hadn't gone to the funeral home, Thomas would have gone through with it. He would have faked his death and left me. I would have spent the rest of my life mourning someone who wasn't actually dead. I would have been at that funeral crying over an empty casket with no idea my husband was watching from somewhere, alive and well. That betrayal would have been worse than anything. At least now we have a chance to fix things. It's messy and complicated and painful, but we have a chance. I don't know if we're going to make it as a couple. Some days I think we will. Other days I'm not so sure. The lies were so big. The deception went on for so long. And even though I understand he was in an impossible situation, part of me can't fully forgive him for trying to handle it all alone, for not trusting me enough to tell me what was happening, for planning to let me think he was dead. That's a pretty big thing to get over, but we're trying. That's all we can do right now. We're both working on being more honest, more open. Thomas tells me everything now, even small things. We have a joint bank account that we both monitor. No more financial secrets. No more hidden phone calls. Everything is transparent. It feels weird after so many years of normal marriage, but it's necessary. We're basically starting over and learning how to trust each other again. The debt is slowly getting paid off. We're on a strict budget. No eating out. No unnecessary purchases. Every extra dollar goes toward paying back what we owe. It's going to take years, maybe a decade, but we'll get there eventually. And at least we're safe from the loan sharks. At least that nightmare is over. We just have to deal with the regular consequences of bad financial decisions now, which honestly feels like a blessing compared to what we went through. I still look over my shoulder sometimes, worried that somehow the loan sharks will figure out the death was faked. Worried they'll come after us. Thomas says that's not going to happen. Says they have no reason to look into it further. The debt is written off on their end. They moved on to other clients, other people who owe them money. We're not on their radar anymore. I hope he's right. I really hope he's right. Living under a new identity is stranger than I expected. I had to get used to calling Thomas by his new name. Had to remember our new story when people asked about our past. We keep it vague. Say we moved here from out west, met through work, nothing too specific. It's lonely. Sometimes. We can't talk to our old friends. Can't see our families. They all think Thomas is dead. That's the hardest part. His mom still calls me sometimes, wanting to talk about him. Share memories. It breaks my heart every time. She lost her son, or at least she thinks she did. And we can't tell her the truth. It's too dangerous. Too complicated. She has to keep grieving while her son is alive and well, just living under a different name in a different state. I asked Thomas if he regrets it. All of it. The investment, the lies, the fake death. He says yes. He says he regrets it every single day. Says if he could go back and do it differently, he would have told me the truth from the start. We would have dealt with it together. Maybe we would have lost the house anyway. Maybe we would have had to file bankruptcy sooner, but at least we would have been honest with each other. At least we wouldn't be living in hiding with fake names and a fake life. But we can't go back. We can only move forward. So that's what we're doing, taking it one day at a time, building a new life from the ruins of our old one. It's not the life we planned, not even close. But it's ours. And we're still here, still together, still figuring it out. That's worth something, I think. Maybe not everything, but something. So, yeah, that's my story. That's how I walked in on my husband's funeral rehearsal while he was standing right behind me. That's how I learned my entire life was a lie. That's how we faked his death and started over. It's been the craziest, most stressful, most painful experience of my life, and I'm still processing it all. Still trying to understand how we got here and where we go from next. If you made it this far, thanks for listening. It feels good to tell someone, even if it's just strangers on the internet who might not even believe me. I get it. It sounds made up. It sounds like something from a movie. But I promise you, this is my real life. This actually happened. And I'm still living with the consequences every single day. Hit subscribe if you want to hear more wild stories like this.